Welcome to the CareGiver reality show with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato, who bring you more than a combined 25 years of practical experience, helping thousands of family caregivers, helping them find solutions to the challenges and frustrations presented by this important responsibility. So if you are in the position of caring for a spouse or a parent, a loved one who is no longer able to care for themselves, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, let's tune in to today's edition of CareGiver Reality with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato.
Good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. It's Tuesday at 5 o'clock, and this is the Caregiver Reality Hour. We're looking forward to a great show tonight. We have on with us Carrie Parnes, it's been a long day, who was on a few weeks ago and is just an incredible expert on mental health and issues. We were discussing some just before we went on the show. This is a show that you don't want to miss because the wealth of information that she has and the extent that mental health affects this country and the world will absolutely astound you. It's not a night necessarily of statistics, but it's one to look at the global issue of mental health, the people that have to care for them, the caregivers of mental health.
We're going to be going into depth.
And we're going to be going into that. And we really feel that this is an area that stays, unfortunately, under the radar because nobody talks about mental health. You know, we went at a point where we talked about cancer, and it was only the C word. Then we went to Alzheimer's, and we barely talk about that. Mental health and the broad implications of it so transcend age, relationship, illness. It's everywhere, and we're all humans, and at times we are all affected by our emotions, who we are as humans, and what we're experiencing and the issues that we face. And so we're not saying that everybody has chronic mental health issues, although it's an extraordinary amount of numbers when we get to talking about it. But everybody at times will succumb to the pressure of what's around them, the circumstances they're put in, and it will affect them mentally, physically, socially, and in any other spectrum that you care to put it into. So I'm really pleased, as is Paul, to have you back tonight, and I'm looking really forward to this discussion. You'll have to pardon me out there in the big wide world. I still haven't been able to shake the last of this cold, and so
I told you were typhoid Mary last week.
All right, well, this time I'm only a little less than typhoid. But as we start every show, Paul, how was your week?
And very good. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us again this week. This has been the same continuation on between Debbie's issues with her throat and this intense chronic fatigue that it is like a cloud that comes over, and she's so much sleeping. So we're trying to manage the symptoms as we get along and coordinate the specialists that were there. But at the end of the day, it's that you have to make the decisions as to what you are going to do and what you're not going to do. And, you know, we were talking before, and you just mentioned now about the way it affects it. I mean, the mental health side of this has not been addressed, and that's something that really needs to be looked at as well.
And it's one of the most under-respected circumstance that happens with chronic illness, and it's so overlooked because we're not really looking for it. And if you don't know what you're looking for, it's very hard to find it.
Yeah, it doesn't come out on a blood test.
No, it doesn't.
So how's Suzette? What's going on with you?
Oh, it's been a long week, even though it's Tuesday. I was caregiver.
It's only one Tuesday in the week, David.
I know. But it was a long night last night. She didn't have a good one, and so her caregiver was up all night with her. And so I haven't slept in about 36 hours. I recruited my daughter-in-law to cover for me while I did the show. And when I'm done, I have to release her to go back to my grandkids. But, you know, like everything else, like with Debbie, you just don't know when things are going to happen. You got to roll with the punches. I wasn't sure last night whether we were going to wind up in the ER or not. And fortunately, it didn't result in that, but it was a very tumultuous evening.
Yeah,
And,
unfortunately, they come a little bit too frequently now.
Yeah, unfortunately is right. And, to all of you out there who are caregivers, and most of us are at one point in our lives or not, you really have to be prepared for the unexpected and to just roll with the punches.
So, David,
Yeah.
from your perspective,
Yep.
how do you see the world? What's going on?
Well, when I was thinking about that for tonight, and I know I put down a whole bunch of things here, but one of the things that falls under the radar is kids who are caregivers, and they total in the millions, because every child in a household that has somebody with a chronic illness is affected and become de facto caregivers. Many years ago, when I helped to found the Dysautonomia Youth Network of America, I had an opportunity at that point, because it mainly affects children, even though it's the affliction that my wife has, we would have these major meetings that the families would come to, and I'd have an opportunity to talk to their brothers and sisters, and mainly they were anywhere from 7 to 20. Mm-hmm. And I never realized the extent to which they are recruited many times without even knowing that it's happening. And by way of reference, in our own backyard, there's a woman that I used to work with who used to work for me, and her name is Dr. Connie Siskowski. And when I started the American Association for Caregiver Education, she started one American Association for Young Caregivers. And the reason that she had done it is that here in our own backyard in Palm Beach, she had gone and asked the school board to ask the questions. They take a survey of students that are sophomores and juniors every year. And so they asked them, are you responsible for taking care of somebody who can no longer take care of themselves? And astonishingly, they asked this of 11,000 middle and high school students, and 6,700 of those 11,000 said someone in the house has some kind of special medical need. 92.5% of them said they participated in the care for that person, and when asked if it affected their academic performance, 2 out of 3 resoundingly said yes. So what we have to understand is that caregiving is everywhere, and that children are no different. If there's care going on in the home, then everybody in the home is affected, right down to the dog, the cat. And Paul, because your cat is a constant companion to your wife and is affected by her moods, the same situation occurs with, as you know, I have 4 dogs, and they rotate who's taking care of Suzette, and they wouldn't leave. And when she's having a bad day, they just know what they have to do. And it's no different with kids. And many times they're left in a role that's not explained. Oh, Johnny's special. Well, okay. And then they realize that they're responsible for running interference for Johnny. But many times what happens is their quality of life as a kid, well, I can't play soccer because my mom can't drive me to soccer because she's got to stay home with Johnny. So I'm not a soccer kid anymore. Or something went on and all of a sudden I missed out on things that the other kids were doing because I had to be home with my brother, my sister, my mother. Very recently on television, for one of the first times, was a picture. It was a short commercial that showed a young man, maybe 17 or 18, taking care of his mother in bed who had multiple sclerosis. And you just don't think in those terms of who's the caregiver. And so as we broadcast worldwide and we look at caregiving, just as we say it doesn't care what the age, the relationship of the patient or the disease, nor is it of the caregiver. Caregiving comes in any shape and form, regardless of age. It's a role and it becomes a responsibility if you're enmeshed in it. And so we can't overlook the fact that our children, in a day and age of aging and chronic illness that has become rampant, all right, in so many different categories, that these are de facto caregivers. And when you count them, we're not counting the children. We're counting people over the age of 18 or wherever they're marking the line of demarcation to figure out who's a caregiver. And we can't forget that if you're old enough to walk around in the house and you've got an illness there, you're probably a caregiver.
Well, David, you have one patient and you can have 2, 3, or more caregivers that are going through stress of their own. They have problem-solving issues, their anxiety, they're angry, they're frustrated. They're going through a whole
right, and then they got to show up for school just like you have to show up for work.
Exactly.
All right, and so, I guess the overall point that I'm making, and I think it's obvious to the audience as well as obviously to the two of you, is that caregiving comes in every form, slice, relationship, and we can't overlook the children because we forget and they kind of slide under the radar, but they're just as affected as the grown-ups are.
And more vulnerable, actually.
Absolutely, because they don't even know at times that what they're responsible for and why they're doing it. All right, they just know that somebody is dependent upon them and that the family is looking to them to be part of the solution when they don't even many times understand the problem. You think adults have a problem understanding their role as caregivers? Imagine children. So,
well, with that brings us to Engage to Change.
Yep.
Advocacy for caregivers worldwide. Be a change maker. There's so many of us who are going through this. I really challenge you. Write me at paul@caregiverreality.com. Tell me that you're engaged. If you want, tell us your story. Tell us your thoughts on this. This is your mechanism to get it out there, because if we get enough caregivers organized, our voices will be heard, our anger will be addressed, and our frustrations hopefully will be lessened, because then we have numbers. And we have a potential 60 million plus of us out there who do this every single day. And all three of us here at this table are caregivers.
Right. And we're not even counting the kids.
That's
So you can make up the number anywhere you want. 60 is a nice number. It could be 80. It could be 50. Does it really make a difference?
No.
No, because caregiving is everywhere.
Why don't we take a break?
All right. So we'll go to our break and stay tuned, because when we come back, it'll be Kerry Parnes and an incredible discussion about mental health and how it affects all of us. So take it away.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at david@caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at paul@caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one.
This is Paul Vadiato, co-host of the Caregiver Reality Hour. Be sure to join us Tuesdays at 5 p.m., 1470 AM on your radio dial, iHeartRadio, or live stream on caregiverreality.com/live show. Be sure to visit us on our website, caregiverreality.com, and like us on Facebook. Join the conversation.
This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
And we're back, and I just want to remind everybody that one of the ways that we're on the air is due to the good services of Arden Court, located at 1650 Jog Road in Delray. They are the gold standard, in my estimation, for dementia-assisted living. And Marcia Teal, who is their director of marketing.
Good people.
Oh, great people. And so if you're looking just to have more information about dementia, or you're interested in seeing whether or not your loved one is ready for a facility, I strongly suggest that you give Arden Court, ask for Marcia Teal. That number is 561-498-3332. And 561-498, excuse me, my eyes are blurry, 5552. That's 498-5552. I apologize. It's been 36 hours nonstop, and my eyes aren't focusing so well. In any event, we have Kerry Parnes here, and she's CEO of Florida and Philadelphia, the Mental Health Center. Was started by her father back in the 50s, an incredible man who had the foresight to understand what was going on in mental health before it was really a word in our vocabulary. And he has passed the baton on to his daughter, who is just an incredible a source of information, professional response. And Paul and I are working very hard to be part of that mental health conversation, both as it relates to caregiving and the broader issue of mental health. So welcome. Great to have you back. And I really appreciate the fact that you're here. Paul, I'm going to let you take it over from here.
Okay, thanks, David.
If I fall asleep, kick me.
Okay.
Not because of you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, please.
It's always
Our
a pleasure to be here.
Carrie,
Hi, Paul.
yeah, it's so good to see you back again. We got so many things to talk about.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
So I did my perspective last week, and I was really upset about this whole issue of mental health and the way that it still, in some areas, carries the idea of a stigma or a taboo. Talk about that a little bit. Why is it so we can't have a discussion without people wanting to back off it?
It's nothing new. I would say that it's not in some areas, it's in most areas that we are afraid to talk about mental health, illness, various kinds of conditions. Certainly it doesn't happen to us. It doesn't happen to our family. It's other people who have mental health conditions. And I think really it's because we're afraid that someone's going to think we're crazy, or maybe we're afraid that we're going to think we're crazy. There is a huge lack of understanding in the general populace of the connection between the mind and body. You cannot, and now we understand enough about the mind. Neurologically, we understand enough. Of course, we used to say this many years ago, and we didn't have the scientific data to back us up, but we certainly do now, to understand that we are, as human beings, like any animal, human beings, we are part and parcel. Our mind and body, our mental health is all interconnected, so that we need to start thinking in a larger sense about ourselves, and understand that if we have a physical disorder of any kind, whether it's it could be a broken leg, and we're in something very simple, a broken leg, and we're healing, to something much larger like diabetes or a heart attack or Alzheimer's, and really a chronic condition like that, there is going to be a mental health component. And there's going to be a mental health component for us, and most likely for our loved ones, especially if our condition is chronic.
And it's so hard to identify. If, as I said earlier, if you don't know what you're looking for, is it just a bad day? Is it, you know, one of the things that I'm anxious to understand from you, the professional and the experience that you have is, and I know Paul's probably about to ask this, is how do you first approach figuring out whether somebody has a condition if they don't raise their hand and say, I'm feeling depressed? If you were to walk into a room and listen to people talking like a support group, would you be able to assess by their body language or the things they're saying?
Would I be able to assess? Absolutely.
Okay.
But I'm a trained clinician.
I understand
And
that. That's why I asked the question.
Is a cardiologist able to assess a heart condition? Yes. Sometimes, I mean, we do have actual tests that we can give in some cases, and a lot of it is face to face, reading the signs, asking the right questions, to really hear how a person is thinking, how they're engaging. It doesn't mean that there is a long-term
Inevitability of it?
right. It also doesn't mean that if someone is depressed now, it doesn't mean that they're going to be depressed for the rest of their lives. There's something called reactive depression. They may be depressed because of a particular situation in their life. It is situational. It is reactive, and sometimes they need some support. Sometimes they just need somebody to talk it through and help them to think through and to feel like they have a place where they can go to dump and to work through. And sometimes it turns into an actual clinical depression where medication might be appropriate, which is at which point a person should go to a psychiatrist to be diagnosed. Again, this sounds very scary. I'm going to a psychiatrist. I'm going to be put on medication. Understand that most mental health conditions are short-term and can be treated, just like most physical health conditions are short-term and can be treated. So
Makes perfectly good sense.
But, you know, and there's so many different in the spectrum called mental health or mental disorders or mental.
absolutely.
So, how common a problem is it within families? How often do we see those kind of issues popping up?
I don't, off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I mean, I can read from my statistics here,
Yeah.
and I'll throw a few out at you in a moment. But I cannot. I've never met a family. I have never in my lifetime met a family in my professional world or in my everyday social world that does not have someone with some kind of mental health condition that they're dealing with, whether, again, it's a more serious chronic condition or something more short-term.
Right. It's like having a bad hair day.
Well, maybe it's a little, it's like asking the question, how many families need to go see the dentist?
All.
How
Everybody.
many families need to go see a family practitioner?
Again.
How many families have an incidence of high blood pressure? Okay, that gets a little more serious, and maybe not every family, but probably most. If it's not in one generation, certainly it's going to be a parent or grandparent.
Right.
It's literally that common. So again, we have to ask the question: why would we not assume that mental health is going to be part of our everyday life and something that we have to deal with?
It makes
Every
perfectly
family.
good sense,
Every
doesn't
family.
it, Paul?
So I have from NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. 1 in 4 adults, approximately 61.5 million Americans, experiences mental illness in a given year. 1 in 17, about 13.6 million, live with a serious mental illness such as schizophrenia, major depression, or bipolar. So 13.5 million with the very serious chronic. But 5 times that, 61.5 million are dealing in a given year with a mental health condition.
We can just about match them up as caregivers. You know, I don't mean to be. Of course.
Of course.
Right. And why wouldn't one want to have, just as you go to the dentist to make sure that, you know, you don't have tooth decay and gum disease.
And it's non-discriminatory. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter who you are, where you live, how old you are, ethnicity matters not.
No. I mean, we all have to have our mental oil changed.
I'm going to go as far as to say it's normal. If you live your life connected with people that you love, if you have a job, or if you're a caretaker at home, if you're a parent, if you're a child with siblings, if you are going to have emotional issues come up in your life, and sometimes those emotional issues are going to become overwhelming. You're going to experience times of anxiety. You're going to experience times of depression. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need to seek help, but if those things are happening more and more often, and if those things, you asked a few minutes ago, how do you know? If those experiences and those feelings start to interfere with your everyday normal functioning,
Yep.
that's when you know. That's when you know.
So extrapolating from those numbers, for every person that is getting treatment, what would you say percentage is not getting it but really should?
Okay. So, NAMI says approximately 60% of adults and almost one half of youth ages 8 to 15 with a mental illness received no mental health services in the previous year.
Say that again?
Yeah.
60% of adults and one half of kids 8 to 15 with a mental illness, not maybe, with a mental illness, received no mental health services.
Wow.
Wow.
And to take it a step further, individuals living with serious mental illness face an increased risk of having chronic medical conditions. Adults living with mental illness die on average 25 years earlier than other Americans, not because of the mental illness, largely due to treatable medical conditions.
Okay. And
They
the
have medical
stress.
conditions that are not getting treated because the mental health condition is impairing them enough that they're not following through and either recognizing or being able to do something about their treatable medical conditions.
So it's unbelievable when you consider the numbers. From your professional perspective, how do we begin to enlighten people as to, I mean, we're broadcasting live tonight all over the world, and so many people don't even recognize that they have, or they just think it's a bad day or it's been a bad week, you know, but yet it accumulates and it can then turn into a bad year.
Right.
And
Paul?
yeah, it adds up. So, Carrie, if you would take us through the clinicians, the practitioners, the various levels of professionals someone might encounter if they're showing signs of depression or they have other mental conditions that really need help. What's the chain of command, if you would?
Okay. If you feel like you have even possibly have any kind of mental health condition, you're going to seek out at a minimum educational level, a master's level clinician. May or may not have a specialty in your area. There's some clinicians that are generic mental health. And it might be a clinical social worker. It might be someone with a master's in psychology who has some kind of practice and experience in treating individuals or families or children, depending on what you're looking for. And you're going to go and schedule an appointment with them and tell them what you're feeling. And they're going to be able to screen and tell you, you know what, you can come in for a few sessions and we can talk and I can give you some support, but I really think that you're okay. What you're feeling is normal. Given the situation you're going through a divorce, your child has been very ill, your husband has just gotten out of rehab, you know, whatever the situation is. So we'll talk and we'll give you some support, but there's nothing wrong with you. In fact, there's something right with you because you're going through trauma and difficulty in your life and you're experiencing normal human reactions. So I'm going to give you some support with that, and then you're going to go on your way because you're going to feel better. 2, you know, it seems like this is really getting in the way of your functioning in your life. So let's talk about the different options. One would be to come into therapy more than a couple sessions, to be seen weekly, or if it's very serious, maybe twice a week. But usually it's weekly for a period of time, and let's see how you do. 2, a higher level, which would be, I'd like to refer you to a clinical psychologist, PhD or PsyD, with a specialty in a particular area to screen for something. We don't know if your child has autism. We don't know, I'm a master's level clinician, and I'm suspecting maybe that we're dealing with bipolar, and I'd like you to have a full evaluation from a psychologist who specializes, and then we'll see where we go. 2, I'm going to refer you to a psychiatrist, maybe for that kind of evaluation, and also maybe to discuss the possibility of medications, because a psychiatrist has an MD. Some psychiatrists do therapy, but most specialize simply in
prescribing.
medication management, which is certainly not the entirety of mental health treatment. In fact, it's just a small piece of it. But sometimes it's crucial as putting a diabetic on insulin. It saves lives, and it certainly saves, at times, stress and a tremendous amount of pain. Not appropriate for everyone, which is why you need to see the appropriate professional.
Carrie, just to rewind a little bit on what you just spoke about, the word trauma is used so often, and we hear it. What is a trauma?
A trauma is a life event or experience that impacts you to the point where you have lasting effects.
Okay.
And those lasting effects sometimes are for a year or two, and sometimes are for the rest of your life, depending on how severe the trauma is.
So that when we hear about all of our wounded warriors and hidden heroes, as it were, coming back and maybe not immediately, but beginning to show signs of, post-traumatic stress disorder, that could be a long-term event if somebody doesn't help and intercede on their behalf.
It most often is a long-term event. I mean, if we think about the type of situation that we're sending these usually young men and young women into and what they experience, again, a human being put in that kind of situation, a normal human being, is going to suffer trauma, and we would expect to see post-traumatic stress disorder. We would expect it. We should expect it, which means that anyone who's in a wartime situation should be screened for that and should have treatment available to them. Unfortunately, that's not happening.
Yeah, I mean, you stop and think about World War II and Vietnam. We really never heard the word PTSD until maybe many years later. And I've heard stories told around the caregiving table where the PTSD and the experiences sometimes don't come out for 15 or 20 years. They're bottled up inside, and all of a sudden there's an overwhelming event or a significant circumstance that bubbles it up to the surface, and all of a sudden, wow, it hits you.
Right. We didn't understand PTSD the way that we do now, but we have long understood the numbers when it comes to how many of our veterans come back and become alcoholics, drug addicts,
Homeless.
go through divorce, homeless, can't carry a job, or end up suiciding. It's huge, those numbers.
It's just
Now-
it's treatable.
Now
is
the VA
treatable.
and places like that look for it, do they not? At
They
least
do.
proactively.
They do.
Yeah. Getting back to the expectation that so many people really are having these type of problems, really the first person they should speak to is their primary physician, and that's just part of your health, is it not? Your well-being.
It is. Although I'm going to get a little bit on my soapbox here and tell you that the majority of primary care physicians have little to no training in mental health.
I was going to say, if they don't go at it a little proactively, like saying, how are you feeling and what's going on, as opposed to,
What's the
tell me
cough
what's
all
wrong.
about?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Again, yes, that can
And
be
we're
the
not
first place you
castigating
go.
them. If you haven't been
No.
trained in it, you haven't been trained in it.
Right. Yes, that may be the first place you go. And sometimes a primary care physician will try you on, they don't do therapy, so they're going to try you on a mild anti-anxiety agent, or maybe a sleeping pill, or maybe a mild antidepressant. But if that doesn't work, you need to get to a specialist.
No different than any general practitioner saying you need to go see the cardiac specialist,
If
the
you-
gastrointestinal guy, or
Right.
whoever it may be.
If you're pregnant, you go to an obstetrician.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't stick with your primary care physician to take you through your pregnancy.
Makes perfectly good sense.
And the head is attached to the body.
Last I looked, yes. Yes.
Well, it's very interesting as you kind of put all the pieces together, that it's such an overwhelming problem in this country and obviously worldwide. And when we look at events that happen that are just catastrophic, I mean, just look at the ISIS events and just terror for no reason than just the sheer terror of it. How many people around the world are sitting and cringing and worrying whether or not are they going to be the next group that's just attacked for no reason, kidnapped, absconded with?
Millions. Such a small thing. Very recently, one of my children brought up to me, and it's a small thing, but they were children at the time. Do you remember all the hype around moving from 1999?
Oh, the
Y2K.
The Y2K.
Yep.
Recently, one of my children told me that at the time, and I want to say that child was maybe 10 or 12, they were really, really scared for a long time.
That the world was going to come
Worried
to an end.
the world was going to come to an end, or if it didn't, something really horrible and out of control was going to happen. When you're 8 or 10 or 12,
And everybody's talking about Y2K, and you're not even
and
sure what
nobody
it
knows
means.
what it means, what's going to happen, but something awful's going to happen. Something awful's going to happen. Okay, so in my kids are now in their all in their 20s, some in their older 20s, mid 20s. They still remember that as a negative, as a little bit of a mini trauma experience.
And I'll tell you, the carry forward is that I have a good friend in the software business, and I review some of the contracts that come through. There is still language that says there won't be a bug, et cetera, or a Y2K issue. And here we are 15 years later,
Right.
and we still have language in contracts covering an event that was history.
Right. But what that all points to is, with media today, with the way that our kids and our young adults are on the internet, with the way that we have access to news across the world every second of every day, we are impacted, flooded all the time with all of this stuff. And there are bombs going off, and there are people being killed, and there are fires, and there's all this kind of stuff. It has an impact on us, on our lives, and on our minds, and on our emotional state.
Well, with cable, it's round the clock, 24/7.
Yep. You can pick the disaster of your choice at 3 a.m. in the morning.
And which side of the fence you want to be on.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So
All
when
right.
you were a child, you probably weren't worrying about what was going on in Israel or Iran or France. Today, an 8-year-old is exposed to that.
My grandchildren, who are 13 and 14, all right, just by way of example, are so computer literate. They're constantly on the iPhone and texting. There's nothing that they haven't been bombarded with and taken out of context in a young developing mind, that
Exactly.
around them are these continuous horrors and then funny stuff. And, how do you sort it out when you're growing up emotionally and put it in the right category, the right bin, and deal with
Absolutely.
it? And so we have just, while we've created a generations now of very technology literate young people, they're also exposed to everything that's out there that's being communicated
Well,
via.
it's compounded, David, and Kerry, correct me if I'm wrong, but we look at the video games, we look at some of the activities the young people are involved today.
Absolutely.
So much violence, and then you see it reinforced on the news in one form or the other.
Absolutely.
Has to affect them.
So
Well, it affects us as adults.
So who has anxiety?
Right.
I think the
Everybody.
question is who doesn't.
Right.
It's called a parent.
But again, it's when it gets out of hand. It's when you begin to realize
And obsess over it.
it will obsess over it, or you realize, I'm not. I was invited to go out, but I just don't feel like it, and I'm not going time and time again. I'm not going to the health club and working out. Maybe it's a child and they're beginning to go to school less and less often. I just kind of don't feel well.
Mm-hmm.
When it's beginning to affect, you go to work and you're not able to concentrate at work because you're ruminating. You're not sleeping well night after night after night.
Right.
Because not because you're a caregiver,
right.
but because you're worried about things.
Right. And that was a very interesting word you used, ruminating. And for those of us who are old enough to know what ruminating is, all right.
Apparently, I'm in that category now.
Well, just because a cow has multiple stomachs and a process of digesting, and it passes it back and forth, and that's called ruminating. And so it doesn't just go through like it does with us. It's a constant process of over and over again, and it's such a great word.
Mr. Green Jeans, look at you.
Right, you're thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it, and it's you lay down at night and all your problems start coming up, and you just can't seem to get to sleep.
That was me last night.
It happens to everyone. See, and this is the difference between normal and a problem. It's normal when it happens occasionally. It's a problem, not abnormal, because it's not abnormal to get a cavity. It's not abnormal to break a leg. It's not abnormal to begin to have high blood pressure. But it is something that needs treatment.
Right.
If it's beginning to become a problem.
So let's look at this from the perspective we talked about before, about we have physical problems, we perhaps have mental issues. Back in 2008, they passed legislation that said that they could no longer discriminate between the protocols for physical medicine and mental health.
Correct.
And the Affordable Care Act now reinforced that. I know there are exceptions here and there, but since you are doing this on a day-to-day, what is the reality?
The reality of the connection between physical and mental health,
No,
or the reality?
the dollars, the
Right.
support.
Do the dollars flow to mental health? I think is probably where that was
question.
coming
Yeah.
from.
No,
No.
absolutely not.
Now, I know the last time you were on, excuse me, Paul, and we had indicated that Medicaid was going to start to pick up the bill for children that were on the autism spectrum or had other mental health issues. I understand that since we heard that things are changing. Is that true?
Yes. They barely pay enough. The state of Florida, through Medicaid, barely pays enough to find a clinician, maybe, who's willing to take that level of pay. But what they did recently is they cut out mobile therapy.
Which means
that we did have clinicians. We had a group of clinicians that could deal with children on the spectrum in their homes, in their schools, and that included a bachelor's level therapeutic person and a behavior specialist, a master's level person who specializes in certified and specializes in behavioral treatment, and also a mobile therapist who could support the family and the individual if it was appropriate for them. Sometimes a teenager and a higher functioning autistic teen might be an appropriate candidate for therapy. Certainly the family, the caregivers, the siblings. So they've cut out mobile therapy. That just happened.
and it was around for what, 8 weeks? I mean, since they decided to cover things.
I think it was a little longer than 8 weeks, but dealing with the state has really been a moving target. I give them a lot of credit for trying to evolve this, but at the same time, they're one of the last states in the country.
You're talking about Florida.
I'm talking about Florida, to be able to be willing to take Medicaid dollars and put them towards treatment for kids on the spectrum. They're one of the last states to do it. And they could look at other states and see what's worked and what's not worked, I think, and Perhaps, maybe, I don't know, but do it more effectively. When you pull out mobile therapy, I believe you're pulling out an integral part of the treatment.
And let's really draw that picture. Mobile therapy meaning that the therapist is going to the school, the therapist is going to the home, so that the delivery of these services are effective.
The mobile therapist would not generally go to the school. 99.9 times the mobile therapist is going to go to the home.
Okay.
And they're going to
deal
be
with it in the setting.
in the setting. They're going to be offering therapeutic support to the family, to the parents, to the individual, to the siblings. You described a situation. You were talking about siblings. Well, the siblings of a kid on the spectrum, while they may not directly be asked to take care of that child, or they certainly do not have the typical time and energy from their parents that a kid would who doesn't have a sibling on the spectrum.
And I can speak to that because I have a granddaughter that is on the spectrum, and I see the impact on my grandson because he's always running interference and he's, trying to make things work. And he's
trying to take care of himself.
Exactly.
Usually it's his job to be the good kid. And I don't know your
Right.
grandson, but
Well,
usually
you
it's his
just
job
described it. He
to
is
be
the
the good
good
kid, go to school, get good grades, don't cause a problem at home because we love you, kid, but we don't have time for this. And you're the kid that doesn't have the problems. So just don't have the problems. And, do you think you can make yourself breakfast because your sister's not doing too well this morning and we're having some problems. We need to deal with that. And
Right.
can you go do your homework in your room because the therapist is coming to or not the therapist anymore, but the behavior specialist is coming to the house. So,
right. Or I have to go
all of that.
one-on-one with your sister because that's the only way we're going to get her homework done. And I know you can
Right.
go upstairs and get it done.
Right.
So this is really a de facto cut in services that are going to impact many, many families.
Absolutely.
They can't get to the office, they're not going to get help.
And so we wonder why kids that grab a gun go to school. And can we not expect that the violence around us, which affects, as you said, everybody in one form or another, and I don't mean just to keep it in the tenor of violence, we then see young brains act out what they see on the tube, what they see on their video games, what they see on the news or hear or suppose is happening. And then, well, I guess everybody else can, and I'm frustrated, so why can't I go do that?
There have been studies that have results that cut both ways that say, and you have to look very carefully at studies because
Right.
who funded those studies?
Exactly, and what are they
that say
supposed
no,
to do?
the violence doesn't affect children, and yes, the violence does affect children. I cannot imagine
That it doesn't.
that the violence and the exposure that
To some
that-
degree,
that,
Well, I mean,
that
the
our children
violence
have.
affects all of us. So what would make a child who may not be able to kind of sort it out not be affected by it?
I don't know that you can say that the violence around us is going to make a child pick up a gun, but I do know that you can say that a child that is having emotional problems that is not treated is much more likely to pick up a gun.
All right.
Again,
And
I'm going to go
I
back
didn't mean to go to that extreme. I
Right.
just was making maybe a poor analogy.
I had something here about there's so many stats on here that I can't. 70% of youth in juvenile justice systems have at least one mental health condition, and at least 20% live with a severe mental illness. So that means that our kids who are committing crimes, and let's not even talk about guns,
Right.
just simply committing crimes, 70% have a mental illness, or a mental condition at least, a mental
Okay.
condition. They've not been treated. The majority have not been treated. Some
And then
have.
you get in
The
the
vast
juvenile
majority have
justice
not.
system, just like prison.
That's where they end up.
And then you pull the plug on the mechanism that can deliver them the help.
Right. And why should we be surprised
And
that,
now the
that it's
families
not
are
rampant?
supposed to be the mental health experts along with the caregiving experts and take care of the problems on their own.
Right.
And that simply just doesn't work out.
What it comes back around to, and this would be the same for if you look at the majority of your alcoholics and drug addicts. Yes, there's a genetic component. Yes, there's very often substance abuse in the family, addiction in the family for generations. Yes, that piece is true. But what is also true is that, and I don't have the stats, but a huge number of addicts are self-medicating. And
Yep.
there are what we call co-occurring disorders. They have anxiety, they have depression, they have bipolar, they have something else that hasn't gone recognized or treated.
And they're trying
they-
to block it out.
They're trying to block it out, or they're trying to soothe themselves. They start out with one drug, it might lead to another, or they're drinking and the drinking gets out of hand.
Might that explain the high numbers that end up back in rehab a second or a third time?
Absolutely. The majority, although they say that they do, the majority of rehab centers do not adequately treat mental health disorders. They focus very, very heavily on the substance abuse and the alcoholism, which is hugely important, because if you don't deal with that, you can't even begin to deal with mental health issues. I mean,
Right.
that, or the physical issues or anything else. You need to deal with that. But you also need clinicians who are really, really experienced in depression or anxiety or bipolar or whatever else,
Otherwise,
or
you're just going to
trauma,
go back
or
into
trauma.
the same thing.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, because they were abused as a child, because they lost their parents in a car accident. I mean, there's a million different things, and the mental health issues need to be adequately addressed, and they're usually not.
Along
They're
with
usually
what's
not.
going on within the family, the dynamics of that family.
Yes, of course.
Right. And many times it doesn't come out because everybody else is covering for it.
Right. Covering for it, covering for themselves.
Right.
Again, afraid. It goes back to we're a perfect family. We look good. We don't have problems like that.
Uh-huh.
And if we do, we're sweeping them under the carpet and we're not talking about it. We may not even be admitting them to ourselves, but we need to understand the potential fallout if we don't admit to ourselves that we are experiencing, or that our child is experiencing, or that our spouse is experiencing a true mental health condition
And
or an addiction.
we really don't see a lot of that addressed in the media. I mean, when we all learned about bigotry from All in the Family, because it was done with a ha-ha as well as, the whole set of circumstances, I don't recall any more than I really see a lot of caregiving, that we have many programs out there that deal with mental health in a form and a manner, all right, that would help to educate the public better. It just seems like, you can't turn on a sitcom, for lack of a better way of putting it, that addresses some of these issues so that people become aware. It's not meant to necessarily be therapy, but it says, hey, families have this, and
There's some, but not enough.
I'm looking at the clock, David, and I think Carrie, it just whizzed on by again.
We never have enough time.
No.
But I do want you to leave some words with our caregivers who are out there, sort of summarizing this, and particularly where you were talking about integration.
Okay. One of the things that is beginning to happen in the health world, I'm not even going to say the mental health world, in the health world, because we really shouldn't be talking about mental health or physical health. We should be talking about health, is an awareness that these things need to be looked at as an integrated health, integrated life experience, integrated family experience, integrated people. We are made up of bodies and minds, and we need to open ourselves to understand better where health has gone, where our understanding of health, mental and physical, has gone, and to look at ourselves as whole beings, and to look at our families as whole families with physical health needs, with mental health needs,
Boy,
and be willing to address them.
That's just an incredible statement. And I just can't thank you enough for being here. Every time you've been here on twice, but we've been meeting with you, and the wisdom that you impart and the ability to say it to people. We only have a minute left, so I'm going to say thank you very much, Paul, I know.
Carrie,
Thank you.
we're going to go into this quite a bit of depth, and you are our subject matter expert on this. We're going to ask you for your help. Thank you for joining us tonight. To all of
And
our
thank you.
listeners out there, our caregivers out there, please take care of yourselves. We'll be right back next week with more Caregiver Reality Hour.
Yep. And it's going to be a great show, just like this one was, so stay tuned.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com. Or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality.